Hello, my name is Spencer Carroll. Today, I will be sharing my Pecha Kucha on Allen Ginsberg, his poem Howl, and the Obscenity trial. Erwin Allen Ginsberg was a famous poet, writer, and human rights activist. Allen Ginsberg was also a pivotal figure of the Beat generation, alongside his Columbia University alumni William Burroughs and Jack Kerouac. Ginsberg had a writing career that spanned over 30 years. In that time span, he wrote more than 500 poems. Allen Ginsberg was born on June 3, 1926 in Newark, New Jersey. When he was a kid, he was raised among several progressive political perspectives. Ginsberg's inspirations include Walt Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe, and most of all, William Carlos Williams. Allen was the son of Louis and Naomi Ginsberg, both of which were Jewish members of the New York literary counterculture of the 1920s. Louis Ginsberg was an English teacher, and Naomi Ginsberg was an immigrant from Russia who dealt with psychological troubles. Ginsberg had only one sibling, a brother named Eugene, who would grow up to be a lawyer. After he graduated high school, Ginsberg briefly attended Montclair State University. However, in 1943, he then started attending Columbia University after receiving a scholarship from the Young Men's Hebrew Association of Paterson. He planned on studying law. During his time at Columbia University, he became friends with William Burroughs and Jack Kerouac. As mentioned earlier, the three of them would become a huge part of the Beat generation. The two pieces of work that everybody remembers Allen Ginsberg for are the poems Howl and Kaddish. Other poems that Ginsberg wrote that are well known include A Supermarket in California, America, and Sunflower Sutra. As mentioned in the previous slide, one of Ginsberg's famous works is the poem Howl. Ginsberg started writing this poem in 1954 and didn't finish it until 1955. It was published in 1956. Howl was praised by many people for its incantatory rhythms and raw emotion. Howl is essentially an indictment regarding society at the time, and anyone who lived outside its standards. The poem celebrates all of those whose lives fell outside what was considered mainstream during the time it was written. It celebrated those who were marginalized because they were artists, drug addicts, or because of their race. Despite it being an iconic piece of Ginsberg's work, Howl wasn't intended to be a shared piece made public. My thesis for this Pecha Kucha was, despite being his magnum opus, Allen Ginsberg's Howl was a controversial piece of literature that sparked a bunch of different responses and opinions. On March 25, 1957, 520 copies of Howl and other poems were confiscated by the U.S. Customs Department after being imported from London. Then, on June 3rd, which happened to be Ginsberg's birthday, two cops arrested both Lawrence Ferlinghetti, owner of City Lights booksellers and publishers, and Shigeyoshi Murao, his partner, for selling obscene material. I found two quotes from Howl that show how the poem was seen as obscene. One example is on page 12 when it says, "Who let themselves be effed in the ass by saintly motorcyclists and screamed with joy." The other example is on page 9 when it says, "With dreams, with drugs, with wicked nightmares, alcohol, and cock, and endless balls." The case was in the hands of Judge Clayton W. Horn, who was a regular Sunday school teacher. The prosecutor was a man named Ralph McIntosh, an elderly assistant DA who in recent years had made a crusade of going after porn merchants. Ferlinghetti was defended by J. W. Ehrlich, who was said to be the shrewdest and most flamboyant criminal attorney. During the case, 9 literary experts were called as witnesses to speak out for the artistry of Ginsberg's poem. It took 2 weeks for Horn to come up with a final verdict. After listening to many scholars attest Howell's literary worth, as well as read both Ginsberg poetry and James Joyce's Ulysses, Horn finally came to the conclusion that Howl had redeeming social importance and was therefore not obscene. In a quote from Judge Clayton W. Horn, he says how Ginsberg uses vulgar words as a part of his portrayal and was in character for what he was writing. He mentions how everyone is different despite being human, as well as enforce the notion that an author should be allowed to express what they think in their own words. Because of its victory in the Obscenity trial, Howl inspired other people to write their own work, even if it was considered controversial. Howl also had a hand in starting the Beat Generation, which Ginsberg was a part of. The Beat Generation included people such as Michael McClure, Gary Snyder, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. In the 60s and 70s, Ginsberg studied under gurus and Zen masters, with Ginsberg being a leading icon of the Beats. He was involved in many political activities, including protests against the Vietnam War, and he spoke openly about issues that concerned him, such as free speech and gay rights agendas. Ginsberg experimented with a number of drugs, believing that under the influence he could create a new kind of poetry. Using LSD, peyote, marijuana, and other drugs, he attempted to expand his consciousness and wrote a number of books under the influence, including the Yage Letters with William Burroughs. In 1954, Ginsberg met Peter Orlovsky and fell in love with him. He remained his lifelong partner. It had been said that Allen Ginsberg has never married anyone and never defended the institution of marriage. However, in the 1950s, Ginsberg came out of the closet because of his experience at Langley Porter. Allen Ginsberg passed away on April 5, 1997 in New York City due to liver cancer via complications of hepatitis. He was 70 years old. As mentioned earlier, Ginsberg was a pivotal part of the Beat generation, and because of that, he inspired the American counterculture of the second half of the 20th century with his groundbreaking poems. In conclusion, despite how controversial it was, Allen Ginsberg's Howl was an impactful piece of literature that not only had legit value and importance to it, but also inspired a bunch of people. It helped launch the Beat generation, and with the help of the Obscenity trial, it paved the way for the publication of other controversial literature in the 50s and 60s.